Hello there! Welcome to Skeleton Key Productions. I'm Crown Graves Cocon. Let's get into the video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about liberalism. Yeah, so this is part of our political theories series, so definitely check it out. Our first one was on democracy. This one's on liberalism. Next one will be on conservatism. We're going to go through all the different political theories. Definitely stay tuned for that. But before we do any of that, like, comment, and of course, most importantly, subscribe. A lot of people are watching the videos but are not actually subscribing. I'm talking to you. Yeah, you. Sitting there. I see you. Subscribe. You know you want to. Subscribe, okay? And like it if you have subscribed already. And write a little comment. Hopefully keep it nice. Doesn't have to be. But I'd rather it be nice. Because if you do write a horrible comment, I'll just shower you with love. Well, at least I'll try to, if I keep my temper down. So, before we get on to that, we're going to have to look at the word liberty, because, the word liberalism derives from the same root Latin word, liber, which means, to be free. So, definition of liberty is this. It's a state of being within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behaviour, or political ideas. And these restrictions can come from any source. It can come from society, it can come from the government, and actually one of the main thinkers of liberalism, John Stuart Mill, who we'll get onto in a little bit, he said that the worst form of tyranny can often come from society, right? But more typically, it does come from government. So, if we really think about this, this is like this one could kind of say ideology, right? This ideology is at the root of Western civilization as such, right? So if we think about, in particular, Britain and America, these are the kind of founding things. So regardless of whether people say that they're liberal, conservative, this, like that, there's a liberal underpinning to all of our societies, and that means having tolerance for other people and not restricting people's right to say certain things and to believe certain things. And so we're in a liberal society such as we have here. People are free to pray however they want, to believe whatever they want, and within certain parameters to say whatever it is that they want. It's also important to note that within that definition, again, it talks about society, right? Without some sort of society, freedom, we can't really think of liberty as such, because it's how human beings interact within society. So a man living in a desert, I suppose is free. They're free from any constraints of society, but they're not interacting with anyone. They don't have to deal with anyone, right? And so therefore, the man completely in the desert is free in some senses, but is not really free as would be understood within this liberal context. Yeah. So liberalism is having freedom within society. So when we think about the history of liberty, right, we have to understand that what the ancient Romans and ancient Greeks who came up with this concept, what they meant by it was it was a very limited number of people who were allowed to be free. So women obviously weren't, and slaves obviously weren't, right? So you're talking about a very small amount of the population who had the right in their eyes, to be free. And within that freedom, it was a thing of people being treated somewhat as equals, right? So in its early days, it was very, very exclusionary. Now, where it ends up coming more and more towards a system that we come to understand, this is when, as we said in the democracy video, right, the prior video, we start to see that the Germanic tribes, which had not been conquered by the Romans, but who still had quite a lot of influence, so their societies were very kind of democratically kind of run, very much like reinforcing of kind of the liberties of individual free men within those societies. And so the franchise was greatly kind of expanded in those terms. So when we start to see the Anglo-Saxons coming across to England, after the retreat of the Roman Empire, and after Rome abandoned Britain. So when we start to see the kind of settlement of the Anglo-Saxons in England, we start to see more and more of these kind of traditions really start to be put more into place. And this is why, even after the Norman conquest in 1066, the occupying conquerors, still had to, in order to run England, they still had to adopt some of the liberties that people had become used to. So even right in 1066, you have something known as the London Charter of Liberties, right? So the City of London, not talking about London as a city, you're talking about the City of London, which is the square mile, right? This is where the big financial sector, etc., right? This tiny sector, right, has been able to retain throughout all these centuries the same what they called Saxon liberties, Saxon freedoms, right? And that meant that regardless of what was happening in the rest of the kingdom, the laws of this little tiny square mile, they were able to basically do their own thing, and even to this day they're able to do their own thing, right? And so as time went on, as the kind of grip of the Norman conquest kind of slowly loosened, and the Normans became more and more integrated within Britain, you start to see bit by bit, you start to see more and more liberties, right? You see more and more things being guaranteed, such as trial by jury in 1187, and also around the same time you start to see Glanville, right? So he was one of the noblemen, right? And he was the person who came up with the modern day concept of what we understand as liberty, as in being free from restrictions from authority, right? So a lot of people have criticized so there's a kind of patriotic song in Britain, land of hope and glory, mother of the free. Now that bit where it says mother of the free, what the people singing that meant by that is that of all countries in the world, right, this concept of liberty, this concept of freedom of the individual, right, came from England, right? It didn't obviously there was some influences from different places as we've discussed, but it's a thing of these ideas really come together and really start to take root in England and in nowhere else really, with some very marginal exceptions. So when people talk about Britain being the mother of the free, that's essentially what they mean. They mean that England was the first place that where these ideas actually started to take root. And this all really culminated with the famous Magna Carta of 1215, right? So Magna Carta, the great document as such, right? The Great Charter. This is where we really start to think about, right? So as we discussed in the last video when we talked about democracy, this is the first time where we clearly see instances where a king has been told by his noblemen that they are entitled to the same rights as he is entitled to, that the king cannot just arrest people without trial, that the king has to respect people, he has to respect people, right? And he can't just rule completely by himself, right? And so this is the first document that really enshrines the rights of people, right? Not everyone. It didn't extend. This first Magna Carta didn't extend to everyone. It just was pretty much that group of nobles. But as time went on, that sense of who's entitled to freedom became ever more expanded. And you start seeing time again. You start to see in 1628, you start seeing in 1679, and you start seeing in you see the culmination of all this in 1689, which is all of these are bills of rights, right? So this is every single one of these. This is different ones where the freedom of the citizens of the country, every single person born in this country, or every single person who lives in this country has these rights of liberty, right? So this is, freedom from arrest without a warrant, freedom from, freedom to bear arms, freedom for all these different things, right? So the early kind of freedoms that we kind of like think of, like to protect the citizens from a tyrannical government, all of these start getting laid out in the 17th century, and this is as part of the clashes between the Stuart ruling dynasty and the Parliament, right? So you see this in the English Civil War. You see all these kind of things, the tensions between the king and the Parliament in this time. This is what ends up bringing forth a lot of these kind of rights being really enshrined within the UK Constitution. So now again, we start to see with these debates, again, a debate in these early days about how far should this concept of liberty be expanded, yeah? How many, does it extend to women? Does it extend to children? Does it extend to, non-British people? Does it extend to people of colour, right? So all of these debates people continually had and stuff, right? So you start thinking of great thinkers such as Locke, who we've discussed previously, who we can kind of think of as like the intellectual kind of like founding father of a lot of like what we think of as like liberal political thought, right? Like a belief in life, liberty, and property. That the role of the state is to protect these against a tyrannical government. We start to see people like during the Enlightenment period. You start to see people like Thomas Paine arguing for these things, and obviously the huge influence that he had in America. And again, the US founding fathers were really like they sought to found the American Republic on these high ideals, right? They sought to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, what's interesting about the pursuit of happiness is this, right? The pursuit of happiness, that phrase was put in as a compromise, and I'll explain why. So, if we say life, liberty, and property, right? In America, at the time of the founding fathers, right? At the time of the American Revolution, when they're drafting, and afterwards when they're drafting the Constitution, even then, many years before the Civil War, there were huge debates raging about slavery, right? And, if you write property, you immediately end up having two different competing views of what is property, right? You have the people who believe that human beings cannot be someone else's property, and then you have obviously the slave owners, or the people who support them, who believe that human beings, or rather, are they human beings at all? That kind of, being in favour of Africans being enslaved, pretty much, right? So these debates were raging during this time, and so to put a kind of damper on it, they said, right, okay, what we'll have is we'll just pick something fluffy, the pursuit of happiness, right? Who could be against that, right? So the pursuit of happiness was a compromise because of the debates around slavery, and also as well, the pursuit of happiness. I've discussed this in other things, and I'll probably discuss it in a future video about how the pursuit of happiness is kind of shaky grounds, but anyway, without going into all that now. So again, we start having we have debates about this. We later have John Stuart Mill, who wrote On Liberty, and he's a Victorian writer, and what he said is like I already said about the societal. The pressures from society are often sometimes worse than any tyranny from government, and oftentimes any tyranny from government is influenced by the tyrannical impulses of the wider society. But he also said, quite controversially in a way, that children could not have liberty because they were bereft of reason, right? So, it's the job of the parent, it's the job of the teacher, it's the job of adults, to take care of kids, because they're not old enough to be able to take care of themselves. They're a potential risk to themselves, and so they need to be guided. So regardless of what they want to do, they need to have authority figures telling them what to do, which I suppose if like anyone has ever dealt with any kids before, like kind of you can see how it might be not the most popular idea amongst them. But as one gets older, one can begin to understand this, and this is why, for instance, we don't have like children having the right to vote. So the problem with that is this was the time of imperialism, right? And John Stuart Mill, like many other people of that time, were a product of their time. And so he extended this same reasoning with regard to children, and basically said that the subject peoples of the empire, i.e. the Indians, the Africans, etc., they were also in a way children, and so they didn't have the same right to liberty. And so he used that argument as a justification for why, even though Britain was meant to be the land of the free, like kind of like Britons never shall be slaves, etc., etc. He used this as a kind of like justification for saying, actually, the people we're enslaving, or the people we're colonizing, they're not really, they're children, so we can do whatever we kind of want with them, right? So so you can see already that liberalism, it's a very, from modern eyes, it's had a very bumpy history, but at the same time, it has laid a lot of the foundations for the society that we live in now. And so we're going to get onto some of that now. So the debates surrounding all these issues, whether it's the rights of women, the rights of colonized people, the rights of either enslaved or formerly enslaved people, all of these complex arguments ends up, creating more of a kind of divergence in a way, right? In terms of what we think of as liberalism. Add to that, you also have a situation where if a man is poor, if a man can't support his family, if a man can't, take care of himself, etc., right? Like, through no fault of his own, just from the fact of he's not able to work, or he's not able to earn any kind of money, is that man free? And this is something that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President Roosevelt said. He said that the necessitous man is not a free man, right? So the man who does not have his needs met, right, cannot be free. So if we define freedom as freedom from oppression, right, there's also a thing of, but this. How do we ensure that someone's also free from other bad things as well? Like, how do we make sure that people are free from starvation? People are free from want, right? So this is where you start to get kind of a divergence between what we were describing earlier as classical liberalism, which basically just has a big emphasis on keeping the government away from being able to take people's freedoms away, to a more modern type of liberalism. So this is where people start to advocate for the government to have a very different role, right? So we start to see, for instance, with David Lloyd George and early Winston Churchill, who both at that time were part of the Liberal Party in Britain, and they in 1911 they pass what's known as the People's Budget, right? And this People's Budget is like the first origins of kind of like a welfare state in Britain, So it's unemployment benefits, it's benefits for the sick, it's very early and stuff, but it's some sort of thing that helps out the very people at the bottom of society. You start to see this with the progressive era in America. Presidents like Teddy Roosevelt and all these kind of all these presidents around the period just before World War One. So in this kind of era, we start to see the beginning of a divergence, right? We start to see well, we'll get into this in the next video talking about conservatism, but you start to see conservative parties become more and more classically liberal, and you start to see the more liberal parties go down this road of modern liberalism, right? So this is where you start to see big government programs, and the conservatives are more arguing for a small state. And so in America, for instance, when people talk about conservative and liberal, what people describe as liberal 100 years ago would not have been seen in that way, right? 200 years ago would not have been seen in that way, right? So this is something we have to understand with political theories, that especially theories as old as liberalism or conservatism, they are evolving over time, and they do change over time, and what it means to be a liberal or conservative does change over time. So we're going to do a future video on this exact debate, and as the intellectual slash philosopher Isaiah Berlin spoke of, he said that the real debate is between positive liberty and negative liberty, right? So just very quickly with regard to this, because we'll talk more about it in a future video. If we're talking about positive liberty, so actually we'll start with negative liberty because it's easier to understand. So negative liberty is basically saying the only thing you have to do is to leave me alone. All you have to do is to not act, right? So if I'm speaking, for me to have the right to speak, all you have to do is not take away my freedom of speech. You have to not lock me up. You have to not silence me, right? If I have the freedom to protest, to do this, to do that, to write whatever I want, etc., right? If I have the right to be tried like fairly, so all you have to do is not to act, right? And so if we look at the American Bill of Rights, all of those like 10 amendments are really focused on protecting people's negative liberties, right? Because that was the view of the role of government at the time. But if we talk about positive liberties, we have to start thinking about, right, the positive liberty is saying that I have to, in order for you to have this freedom, someone has to do something, right? So if someone is starving, then you have to make sure that they have food. If someone doesn't have healthcare, you have to ensure that they have access to healthcare. If someone isn't able to send their kid to school, you have to ensure that they have to. And so even if that comes at the cost of like going through the tax man and saying X, Y, Z, you have to pay taxes for us so then we can give to these people, right? The argument with regard to positive liberty is that for people's positive liberties to be ensured, even if it comes at cost to other people, it still is something where the role of government is there, and it's a thing of the legitimate role of government in that instance is to ensure the positive liberties of people, right? So this is a very contentious thing, and people are arguing about the extent to which there should be an emphasis on negative liberties and on positive liberties, and so this again defines a lot of what we think of as left-right like arguments within the Western world to this day, and will be in future. Now, we in Western countries, we in like Britain and America, we have been free societies for many hundreds of years, and the right of even minorities within our society, to have access to these freedoms have lasted for quite a few generations now. But the question is that, in terms of in the post-war world, right? So after World War II, we had the setting up of the UN, we had the World Bank, we had the World Trade Organization, we had all these kind of things. We had like international courts. We have everything, right? So we start to have what's referred to as a liberal world order, and especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the late 80s, early 90s, we start to see what one could describe as a liberal world order. Now, the challenge of the 21st century is this: how long can that liberal world order be maintained? And are we starting to see the cracks of it now? Because don't forget, for the last 250 years, either Britain or America have been the superpowers running the world. So with the British Empire, and then with the quote unquote American Empire, right? You've seen liberal Western English speaking countries being being the top dogs and stuff, right? On the world stage. Now, how does that world look in a multipolar world where you have a rise in China, you have an authoritarian, you have a pretty much dictatorship in China, you have a pretty much dictatorship in Russia, you have all these rising powers all competing with each other, and even within our Western countries, right, we have people who on both sides of the political aisle who are trying to tear away the fabric of this liberal world order, right? So what is the future of liberalism as we understand it? Is it going to continue to decline? Is it going to have a revival? Is it going to find some new way of evolving? These are the kind of questions that we have to really ask ourselves in the 21st century. And we are the product, whether we like it or not, of a liberal world order. Everything that we've known throughout our whole lifetime, throughout all of our parents' lifetimes and grandparents' lifetimes, for hundreds of years, all we've known is a liberal world order. But within our lifetime, we are very, very likely to see something going opposite direction. And so we have to really ask ourselves, is this world order something which we've taken for granted? Is this a world order that we have to rethink? Is this a world order that we'd like to have torn down? And there's no simple solution to that. There's no quick answers to that. And it really requires a lot of careful thought and polite debate and discussion. And of course, subscribing, liking and commenting on my videos. Stay tuned for a lot more. And if you like this video, the next one, like I said, is going to be on conservatism. One after that's going to be on socialism, etc., etc. We're going to go through all the different political ideologies in a very neat, condensed way. With these talks, I'm pretty much giving you like a university level lecture, or probably even like a whole term's worth of stuff in one very neat, compacted video. Like, I'm going into details, but not into some extreme amount of details and stuff, right? So I'm giving you guys enough of a thing to have a decent like foundation for you to be able to then build on stuff, right? So if you wouldn't mind just liking and subscribing. It took me a while to obviously do research for all this content and to put the video together. So if you wouldn't mind just liking and subscribing, and stay tuned for the next one. And in the meantime, have a great day. Bye.